Let me ask you a question. What do you see when you imagine dragons? Jokes aside, what image comes to mind? Does your imagination wander to the serpents of the east, scaled guardians of rivers who impart their knowledge and experience unto man? Or does your mind fall to the west, and its terrible visions of wing and flame? Dragons are often seen as pillars of power, beasts of strength, awe, and magic, with the capability to level entire cities at their whim and folly. Dragons are a symbol beyond the realms of fantasy, a duality of symbolism representing chaos and destruction within the Western world, while symbolizing wisdom and benevolent authority in the East. I, for one, am guilty of viewing dragons within their Western box, often neglecting the many roles they serve outside of this cultural bubble. I was raised as such, growing up with images ever reminiscent of Tolkien's Smaug, a beast of muscle and molten breath, one who echoes the vision of early European dragons. Yet I cannot deny my fascination with dragons of the East, flipping what I consider the standard of dragons completely on its head. What once was terrible becomes beautiful. What once was chaotic becomes tempered. What once was destructive now calls for creation. The world-building project that this channel was first founded upon, my blend of science fiction and fantasy that I have since coined as Ryng, has deities akin to these folkloric theological symbols, though never expressly being referred to as dragons. These deities of my world, the Fel dictates, embody my natural, Western-influenced vision of the dragon. Beasts and beings of destruction and corruption, more akin to the biblical adversary in their behavior and temperament, manifestations of sin which look only to corrupt the hearts of man. Yet, there remains this mirrored side to the symbol of the dragon, that of benevolent authority and strength, one that to me reflects the overpowering light of the divine. So, what if dragons came from heaven? What would that look like? And how would such a deity fit within the wider fantasy world I have thus far created? In exploring this question, we'll be diving into Ryng's god of justice, nobility, and law, the heavenly beast, Kael, the Celestial Arbiter, looking into his in-world lore, my own writings on the deity, and his grand visual design. Joined with an exploration of the deity itself, we'll be exploring those most devoted to his worship, the Knights of Equinox, a cult of zealous Templars who dedicate their body, mind, and soul to a higher law, one shaped only by a divine hand. That aside, let's begin our discussion with the gods of Ryng, those celestial hosts, came to form over millennia as the chaotic energies of the cosmos condensed and shaped into these beings of divinity. Father, Ryng's first creator god, spurred the manifestation of his 6 heirs, each destined for dominion over their own divine domains. Kael is one such heir, the 5th of 6, created with the sole purpose of interpreting and enforcing the creator's celestial law. Unlike his brothers and sisters, Kael's shape was not that of his creator, disconnected from the humanoid shape of his greater divine family, a shape that would come to reflect itself in the mortal kins of Ryng. Instead of this familiar shape, Kael was forged as a beast of great power and awe, a creature capable of carrying the great weight of his mission, a god of tooth and claw, muscle and bone, wing and feather. However, Kael was not entirely void of his creator's resemblance. His great manner and intellect as a creature of philosophy and reason juxtaposing what many would consider to be a bestial visage. This became the image of the law, an exterior of strength who commands respect, a mind, a great thought and reason to host its actions. Thus, Kael was formed following the birth of heaven's first angels, beings which sprouted from the remnants of Ram's blood, the god of life. Kael was to serve as a guide to these celestial peoples as to the temperament of their natural instincts, that these angels may prove to rise above their primal nature. However, a great host of these angels proved to succumb to these emotional instincts. Their personal, selfish desires for strength, knowledge, and power over their fellow kin first began as whisperings and conspiracies, which over time manifested into twisted shapes of law, beasts which mirrored a corrupt divinity, one ruled by their own selfish law. These beasts, whose visages mirrored that of Kael, became known as the Fell Dictates, Ryng's gods of sin and vice, who in their animalistic shape mock the bestial grace of the Creator's divine law, corrupt shapes used to tempt and deceive mortal kin unto wickedness. These sins, though given the chance to submit to the greater will of the divine, rejected subservience, arming their followers against their divine creators in a celestial conflict known as the War of Law, a battle of divine forces both godly and immortal, which lasted for untold centuries before its abrupt conclusion. The six sins, the Fell Dictates, had plotted a mighty blow to be struck against the Creator, a blow that would thrust the Almighty into the far reaches between stars, a distance to sever his connection to his heirs. With such a severing, the heirs of the Creator would be left without their master's power, weak and ripe for an execution, one which would usher in an era ruled by corrupt law. Yet, Kael saw through these conspiracies of corruption, and being a being of much strength, was able to take upon himself such a devastating blow, condemning himself to the outer reaches of darkness as a sacrifice against the forces of sin. Father, the Creator, given time by his heir's intervention, was himself able to strip the beasts of their celestial strength through the imposing of mortality upon the angelic hosts that followed them, the great power of the dictates stemming from the worship of what were divine beings. Now, stripped of their strength and power, the dictates were banished from heaven's presence, no longer able to contend with the godly light of Father and his heirs, damned to the same celestial prison they had once set aside for the almighty Creator. Yet even after this banishment, there remained great contention within the courts of heaven, as God and angel looked to contend for the fates of those hosts who had fallen to corruption. They were now mortal. They could not stay here. They would not survive in the presence of Father, nor would they survive without it. As the many heirs spoke their thoughts, two camps among them formed, those who longed for the redemption of these fallen hosts, a reinstating of their immortality that would allow their presence in heaven once more, and those who saw better fit to condemn them to the same fate of the dictates, granting these hosts the chance to live according to their own law as they had first wished. Shea and Fern, the goddess and god of emotion and death, believed it best to allow the fallen to access their own law. Shea saw it best that the fallen may live the remainder of their short lives among the law they sought to create, while Fern saw the fallen as having given up their divinity in service to lesser things. Iain and Ram, the goddess and god of knowledge and life, as opposed to their siblings, sought redemption for these fallen hosts. Iain recognized the innocent ignorance of the fallen, wishing that through greater knowledge they might be educated as to their greater divinity, while Ram understood the imperfection present in life, seeing it necessary to offer a second chance to the people he so loved. Father, torn by the perspectives of his children, was unable to resolve such contentions, leading to great discord among his heirs and angels alike. Debate fell to accusation, accusation to action, action to consequence. The hosts of heaven slowly gave way to the corruption they sought to eradicate, a corruption purged upon its third day. From the darkness between stars flashed a pillar of light, wherein returned the fifth son, Kael, to reinstate the divine law he was first formed from. Speaking to the courts of heaven, Kael served as the deciding vote, proposing a plan that would sift the wheat from the tares of mortal kin, one that through the faith of Father's children would lead them back to the heavens in redemption, or through their carelessness would banish them from celestial light. A compromise founded on Father's law, one which ever balanced the scales of justice and mercy, one whose consequence would manifest in the construction of Ryng, an artificial structure to serve as mortal man's test, that the faithful may heed Father's law, and the wicked may reject their divine Creator. This was the plan set into motion by the Celestial Arbiter, one which brought the hosts of heaven together under the cause of its execution. Gods, angels, and deities, all uniting under the banner of this plan of redemption. Now, Kael serves to judge mortal souls who pass beyond the veil of death, weighing the hearts of men upon celestial scales in search of guilt, the heaviest matter of the spirit. Kael serves within his heavenly court, a structure of marble and gold, light and star, that stands equally as a symbol of man's redemption, as well as their consequence. This is the legend of Kael, the Celestial Arbiter, heaven's first beast, the visage of law. It is a tale as old as the gods themselves, passed on by sage and priest throughout man's beginnings. Now a tale found in every chapel, every library, in the form of the Book of the Law, a religious tome containing the many facets of divinity, summarized in its condemnation of the dictates, which reads as follows. Wrath is the heart of the spear, barbaric and damning. Pride is the corruption of the stars, mad and sickening. Conspiracy is the tongue of the deceiver, abhorrent and unclean. Excess is the sight of the hungered, unholy and blasphemous. Sloth is the endlessness of winter, rotten and unfeeling. Envy is the fixation of the raven, obsessive and consuming. These texts guide mortal kin towards their divine redemption, serving as mortality's North Star, a point ever to be sought by faithful and weary souls in search of respite, with law pertaining to each of the faith's 6 cardinal sins. All this, of course, before even recognizing the face of justice, a creature of awe and glory, Kael. When it came to designing my god of justice, there were several elements that I looked to draw inspiration from and apply to my finished design. One which largely mirrors the initial sketches I made in his preparation. In collecting a board of references, as I always do, shout out to Pinterest, I knew I wanted Kael to be a blend of many creatures, a decision actively made to further alienate him from Ryng's mortal sphere of creatures. I knew I wanted him to be feathered rather than scaled, leaning once again further into his divine nature, mirroring more common depictions of angels. To this end, I also knew from the beginning that I wanted him to have between 4 to 6 wings, to not only evoke this imagery of the biblical seraphim, but disconnect him a little further from his original draconic roots. Even still, Kael's narrative inspiration of Eastern dragons is something that will vaguely appear in his final design, though never explicitly, as I remain adamant that no actual dragons exist within the world of Ryng, for the sake of disconnecting my visual and narrative designs from pop culture understanding. Yes, I will be redesigning Khan in the future, since he is the spitting image of pop culture, but we'll talk about that later. Regardless, with a board of visual and narrative substance to guide me, I now had a good place to start. A collection of references that ranged from historical depictions of dragons to more artistic, fantastical creatures, which included everything from more dragons, stylized wolves, bird people, and even angels. All this left me with a solid base to begin my design process, which, after a few sketches, finally became rigid enough to begin working on a fully rendered piece. Kael is a creature formed from the organized energies of the cosmos, the same matter which forms each of Ryng's celestial gods, both the creator and his 6 heirs. However, as opposed to the more humanoid guises of his father and siblings, Kael's appearance is entirely disconnected from such traits, instead being a creature, a beast of justice. Not only is Kael just a simple beast, however, as he is the first, the template for the many wondrous and terrible monsters that would come to inhabit the world of Ryng, seen by mortal eyes as a blend of many beasts, unrecognizing of his true, divine self. Kael's long, serpentine neck and tail move with a lightness of grace, his neck enwrapped in a thick, flowing mane, one which mirrors the snowy white of the feathers that coat the near entirety of his body. These feathers reach far beyond the heavens, woven into Kael's 4 great wings, each of which are ever tipped in celestial blades of light, a residual mark of his divinity, one born through his cosmic formation. His arms and legs, void of the feathers that sprout from the remainder of his body, are strange in their appearance. His forelimbs, dark, scaled, and clawed as those of a reptile, hold articulate fingers and thumbs, a vague resemblance to the perfected intricacy of the human body. His hind legs, however, are canid in their nature, a pair of dark, short-furred limbs tipped in the paws of a great wolf, a disjointed yet elegant image which reminds those of Kael's otherworldly nature as a template for beasts to come. The head, which sprouts from Kael's cloud-soft mane, is that of a six-eyed serpent, each dark eye endowed with an iris of pure gold, eyes that pierce the souls of men in search of their deepest guilt and regret. Atop it all, Kael's head is crowned in 4 golden horns, a shining, brilliant color that frames the feathers and fur of his face, curving back in the image of a halo surrounded in residuals of his godly celestial light. However, Kael's design, as is the case with any of my characters, extends beyond the visual, as his character is very much a thing of intention, crafted and refined to fit his role and guise as the Celestial Arbiter. Kael is a being of great patience, reflected in the slow tremors of his deep, rumbling voice. He speaks as a being aware of his great wisdom and clarity, though never to the point of belittling or disrespecting those who commune with him. Kael, understanding his celestial position forever beneath his divine creator. As the god of both nobility's title and character, Kael's heart is ever faithful to Father and the mission he holds to see the redemption of mankind, though his spirit of justice remains void of his father's mercy, leaving Kael as a being of binary absolutes. There is the law, and it is either heeded or ignored. There is only light, and there is only darkness. Man has already been given their second chance in the eyes of Kael's divine law, and he does not remain a being of eternal forgiveness. He serves as the judge of souls who come face to face with the Creator, a character of perfect justice, whose sentences are only able to be tempered by the celestial head of heaven. As the judge, Kael is a being of great power, able to focus the very light of the divine into great blades and beams to smite all wicked thing caught within his gaze. His celestial light strengthens the faithful and purges the faithless. He is an arbiter of holy reaping, a sword of righteousness, his strength only lesser than that of his creator and his younger brother, the heir once to the throne of heaven, now forever caged in cosmic darkness. This is the Celestial Arbiter, the first beast of heaven, Kael, the fifth heir of the divine, a creature of absolute justice, tempered only by his humility and submission to the Father, but a god of great love for mortal kin nonetheless, even amidst his nature as a condemning judge. This love, however, does not go unrecognized upon the faces of Ryng, as faiths, both orthodox and otherwise, sing praises to their divine interpreter of law. Yet there remain those among the fringes of faith that take the call of justice to new, holier heights. Platinum-clad Templars of holy judgment, the Knights of Equinox. Though there exist many religious cults among the faces of Ryng, both orthodox and otherwise, the Knights of Equinox hold a special place within the realms of faith, a blend of traditional and militaristic values that presents them as a stark contrast to most celestial-worshipping sects. This, as one can imagine, has developed a cautious air among those who interact with members of such a faith. The Knights of Equinox often viewed and stereotyped as incredibly stubborn, judgmental zealots who hold their law above that of any other. However, though such ideas hold some truth within the mandates of the faith, there still remains much more to explore surrounding the nature and beliefs of such a cult, as the depth of their history and nature come to provide a great deal more character to what may originally appear as a cult of black and white. The Knights of Equinox believe themselves to be established shortly after Kael's return to the courts of heaven, the faith's first members being fragments of Father's angelic hosts, hand-selected by the Arbiter himself. This origin within the courts of heaven has bled through into modernity, as the Knights of Equinox believe in some form of predestination, Understanding that every member of the faith, living or dead, was specifically selected by Kael within the heavenly sphere, each Knight of Equinox sent to mortality at their specific moment to accomplish some great work. Whether born into or converted to the faith, the Knights Saints believe every member of their congregation to have a divine call, one which can extend from the grandeur of legendary missions and quests to the service of one's local community. Above all, the Knights of Equinox view themselves as servants to their brothers and sisters, pillars of divine law to be followed in example. Thus, the Knights of Equinox each abide by an absolute law, one interpreted by the first Knight of Mortality, Saint Benelit of the Law, the faith's first prophetic saint, responsible for the translation and transcribing of the Book of the Law, the sacred tome which outlines the specific nature of Kael's divine law. Saint Benelit and the Book of the Law have such a reputation, in fact, that both Benelit and the book were adopted into the orthodox canon of scripture, held by Ryng's traditional cult, the Order of the Loom, as accepted prophetic gospel. Thus, the story of Saint Benelit is one known throughout the many corners of Ryng, as are many stories surrounding a select few of the Knights' patron saints, characters elevated to a pseudo-deific stance, following the great works of faith and justice that they accomplish. In total, though there are many more, there are 3 patron saints of Equinox that are widely recognized by the various cults of Ryng: Benelit, the Lawbringer, Laias, the Lightbearer, and Frorn, the Foehammer, each who bear their own mark upon Ryng's expansive religious history. Benelit, the founder of the Knights of Equinox and the translator of the Book of the Law, was said to be a direct descendant of Kael's angelic court, an angel who, though unwavering during the heavenly war of law, elected to experience mortality in order to provide the world with the divine law. Throughout his mortal years of life, Benelit went on to establish the Holy Order of Equinox, a collection of 12 holy palidins to serve as the world's protectors and defenders against the corruption of the Fell Dictates. Though supposedly legendary in their faith and ability, the Holy Order of Equinox remained rather obscure throughout its time on Ryng, with many of its original founding members being forgotten to the annals of time. Since then, the Holy Order of Equinox has expanded into the Knights of Equinox, now a knightly order open to all who have the faith to follow the fullest extent of Kael's divine law. It is said that Benelit himself never came to perish, instead being taken back up into heaven on the wings of Kael, one of the few mortal men to ever be accepted into heaven within such a state. Laias, the Lightbearer, is one of the few female saints to be widely recognized outside of the Knights of Equinox, recognized for her loving patience and mercy upon the afflicted. Though clad in righteous steel and blade, Laias was known for her miracles of healing, spending the many decades of her life traversing the distant expanses of Ryng's impoverished communities, those wrought by disease and famine, and imparting a divine light upon the afflicted. Her mortal journey, though recorded lasting several centuries, was cut short, having spent her last months administering to the afflicted people of Ruth, the last frontier against the influence of the Wooded Sea. There, Laias would be martyred by the influence of the fell god Canine, the saint, bound and flogged to death by a host of corrupt followers of the unholy woods. Her death, however, would elevate Ruth into the bastion of faith it is today, a place now ruled by divine law, where the Knights of Equinox sit at the state's throne, masted by a direct descendant of Laias herself, Cosmodius the Even-Handed. Finally, the last of the widely canonized saints, Frorn the Foehammer, is a character elevated through his legendary battle and subsequent banishing of Con the Wrathful Spear, the only mortal to ever be recorded overcoming the fell god of war. It is said that Frorn's legendary feat was only possible through Kael's divine intervention, an influence that has since elevated Frorn into a prophetic figure, one believed to have the capabilities of communing with divinity itself. This status has elevated Frorn to a position of great religious influence, even among his refusal to take up a position within the Holy Order of Equinox. Instead, since his heroic feat, Frorn has since built and established a monastery within the island coast of Baronne, a site which supposedly overlooks Khan's place of banishment, leagues beneath the great sea of Aenir's Divide. Even among the influence of such legendary characters, the Knights of Equinox are the only faith that lives the divine law to the absolute, its extensive chapters of behavioral habits being not only intellectually taxing to interpret, but equally taxing to perform. The divine law is meticulous and specific, barring many from entering into the Covenant of Equinox, the ritualistic ceremony which indoctrinates each member of the knighthood. Thus, the ranks of such a faith are few and far between, with small pockets and individuals of faith found sparsely over Ryng's many faces. Even still, this sparse community of faith has been known to assemble in times of crisis, forming themselves into a military force known as Kael's legions, a unified front of holy paladins who serve the greater divine law, a force who kneels to none but God and bishop, whose blade carves through beast and heretic alike. Throughout history, this force has only been recorded to assemble on 6 separate occasions, not all of which without controversy, as the Knights' 2 Crusades of Yetri remain a permanent stain upon their swords of righteousness. Aside from their crusades, Kael's legions were called to assemble during Frorn's battle against Khan, and again in the deposing of the fallen king of Vale, a man corrupted by the unholy influence of Khanine, the fell god of deceit, the same responsible for the martyr of Laias. The other 2 assemblies of Kael's legions have been stricken from public and private record, with such specifics only known to the Holy Order of Equinox, the 12 swords who oversee the Knights of Equinox, a lineage passed down from the original order into modernity. In this office, the Order continues to regulate and interpret Kael's divine law, serving as judges in the case of grievous crimes which extend into the realms of divinity. Sanctioned by the Order of the Loom, this order is only called upon by the prophets of Ryng's Orthodox faith, a relationship between cults which calls to attention many questions of faith and motive alike. This, all in all, comprises the surface of this complex, deep-rooted faith, a knightly order dedicated to the upholding and sanctification of divine law, a cult clad in polished steel and shield, sword and banner, law and faith. If you enjoyed this world-building exploration, please consider liking the video and subscribing for further details on this and my many other upcoming world-building projects. If you'd like to further immerse yourself into the worlds of my making, consider visiting my Patreon, where you can directly support this channel or purchase the first edition of my TTRPG, Glass Arsenal. Until next time, this has been Trackpad Artist. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for our next discussion.